Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Pinus Palace just west of Orlando, Florida. We have a 1980s special tonight on the Xtreme Movie Show, kicking it, our action movies, 80s-centric show. I have with me RDV. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Doing good.
Great. We have a lot of fun on this channel. It's our most popular one here on the Xtreme Movie Show when we talk action films. But while we base ourselves in 80s films, sometimes we stray with it. We do some stuff with TV, horror, sci-fi, and all that, because really we're a media conglomerate just starting to grow. But I just said, let's go back to basics. Let's go back to the early 1980s, sword and sorcery at its finest. A movie that people say is complete, utter trash HBO cheese, and that's The Beastmaster, starring Marc Singer and Tanya Roberts from 1982. And I would sit there and say to somebody, I disagree. This movie borders on actually being a great film. One of the things that I think makes this very interesting movie is that one of my all-time favorite movies, period, and also from the 80s, happens to be Conan the Barbarian with Arnold. And this movie, you go, oh, okay, there they are, ripping off Conan, ripping off Conan, ripping off Conan. But actually, when you watch it, it's really, I don't think, a big ripoff. It's classic, sword, sandal, sorcery, as they say it. There's a lot of dark stuff in here, and while it's a long film, but almost 2 hours, it's got a very dreamy, trance-like quality to it, which goes back just a few years early to 1979, I believe it is. Phantasm by Don Coscarelli, the director and writer of this film, and also Phantasm. So if you're familiar with Phantasm, and then you go back and you watch Beastmaster, you're gonna be like, holy shit, I see what's going on here. Because honestly, some of the stuff we're about to say is really, really badass. It's really, really cool, but some of the execution is a little limp, I think. But overall, I think it's a very good movie, bordering on excellent. What's your initial impression?
Well, I don't think there's anything limp in this from watching this movie. Tanya Roberts, Charlie's Angels, did this movie, did some other stuff. Eventually showed up on playing Donna's mother on That 70s Show.
Yes.
Great actress, great looking model. The main guy, Marc Singer, I kid you not, this guy watching this, he's a dead ringer for Kevin Bacon. He give him the Kevin Bacon haircut, and he's Kevin Bacon, man.
But this would be a couple years later. But yeah, here's the thing about Marc Singer. This movie obviously was 1982, and then there was V, the TV series, which is actually pretty popular. It might have been out for 2 years or 3 or something. I actually didn't really watch a lot of it, but I remember him going, oh, that's the guy from The Beastmaster. This is based on an older book. And to me, Marc Singer, you just go, yeah, he's always going to go back to him. From what I understand, I knew somebody that I think ran into him a long time ago out in California, like in the 90s, somebody I knew who worked out there in one of the studios. And he said, no, Marc's a really nice guy, real pleasant individual too. And I get the impression from him that he is. The same thing with Tanya Roberts. They've got a good chemistry on screen. But here's one of the things about this movie that I just wanted to jump right into right off the bat. This movie, I think, is at its best when there's no talking going on and you're just watching scenes develop. That, like I say, there's times when this movie slows down, but I think those scenes are actually the best because it almost feels dark. And a thing that really is a big benefit of this film is the cinematography, the way it's filmed and shot. Not all of it, but most of it looks just fantastic. There's a crappy couple matte paintings, whatever, but some of the set pieces are just great, and it really looks like it's an A-level production. So to me, we got this guy Dar. We'll talk a little bit, some specifics about the start of the movie and some of the major scenes here, but ultimately he plays like a ranger, and it's cool because there's hardly any movie out there that has somebody doing his hero's journey, but his friends and his associates are animals that have different things. I like that. And there's parts that, if I was a 10-year-old kid and I wanted to take my sword and do like Conan or whatever, it's kind of silly looking in here, but you can still feel it as a kid. But some of these other adult scenes, I'm like, damn it, this is pretty brutal. If they could only just have one tone all the way throughout, it could have been as dark as Conan, in my opinion.
We've seen other movies too with I forgot her name. It's just famous. She's a barbarian actress. Was always in those movies. Blonde.
Sandra.
I think that's her name.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen it where usually where the villains are villains. And even in this, the villains are villains. They're evil guys. Even the minions. The only thing I thought was corny though is when in the beginning where Dar's father walks in on basically Rip Torn, who's the bad guy in this. It's awesome. For those who are younger who don't know who Rip Torn is, Rip Torn was the main guy in Men in Black. He was, he was the main guy. He was the guy who gave him all the directions, orders, stuff. Just recently, probably like the last 5 years, he's passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But he is evil in this, man. I'm getting
he's
like
a bastard. He loves it too.
Oh,
he's chewing up the scenes.
You see him how he gets like even when he's basically casted out because the king thought of her that he was conspiring to basically to kill an unborn child, an innocent child, not knowing it was his own child. I don't know if he figured that out or what, but yeah. So and then you see after he's been cast out, when he appears again later in the movie, his teeth are I'm like, ooh.
He's got great bad guy teeth.
Oh
they're
my
not
gosh.
shiny. They're not white. They're not whatever. It looks like he's been chewing on bone his entire adult, evil man life. And it's not Max, even though it's spelled that way. It's Mayax or something like that. Like
it almost looks like he's wearing braces for a couple scenes. I was like, is he wearing braces? No, it's just his teeth are just rotted, decaying. Because he's evil. And then again, they don't really have thing for cleaning their teeth back then, even though everybody had perfect teeth. He's a perfect bad guy in this, and I'm watching it. I'm getting the Conan the Barbarian. I'm getting the Red Sonja vibes and all that stuff. Marc Singer, like even his character, I love how his character in there, Dar, when he meets Kira, it's just Tanya Roberts, his character. He spies her and her friend are bathing topless in the river, and he's getting all geeking out. I'm like, this is where it turned into like a college frat movie, almost a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little silly. It's supposed to be lighthearted, and it does take away from the darker aspects of it. But it's just a cute way for them to meet and everything too, and plenty of topless moments for you as an '80s kid to enjoy this film.
I told you offline, my dad used to edit everything growing up, so he'd get the VHS, he'd cop another, and he'd edit out all the stuff. So when I watched this first time on Amazon, I was like, "Where did this all come from? It's a PG movie."
Oh yeah, absolutely. PG was different in the '80s than now, no doubt about it.
Oh, it's pretty good.
The movie starts out, that scene you're talking about, the adult Dar, but it starts out, I think, kind of interesting because you got these it's kind of like a ripoff of the Three Witches, the Greek thing, and they're kind of hot. And it's like, okay, we're gonna go immediately into a child sacrifice because of the prophecy. Okay, it doesn't have to be smart stuff. We understand immediately what's going on here. And these kind of hot witches are dancing and jigging around. They turn around like these ugly ass faces. You're like, wow, that's the very definition of butterface right there. But yeah, we know the whole set of the story within a couple minutes here. Kid's going to be born. It's prophesized he'll basically kill Mayax, whatever. So he's like, no, we're going to kill it. So right off the bat, there's no big talk and whatever like that. There's a lot of action. But the cool thing here is it's not just him meeting his animal friends when he's an adult. It's the fact that he gets shipped off. He basically ends up in this town where he grows up with an adopted father who they have a wholesome relationship that doesn't last very long on screen because obviously the raiders come in just like at the beginning of Conan and they just raid the place. And actually what's interesting about here, I'm going, they did not gore it up, but it's actually pretty violent. And I think probably just off the top of my head, and it's fresh in my mind, this movie probably had the most animals in fight scenes and probably animal injuries too, because you've got horses spilling over with people getting gutted on them.
Yeah.
You got him getting off to the side. Hey, Jimmy. But the thing here is that I thought was just a fantastic scene is, you've got some of their huts up there on stilts and they're getting knocked down and the place gets burned and trashed.
Yeah.
But his white dog come and drags his body off to the woods to save him.
Yes.
Then he just dies. I'm like, oh fuck, that was really, really good. I was like, God, I really thought that was a great scene.
Because they're all in while their village is being attacked, they're out there farming a couple maybe 100 feet away, Yep. And the dog goes over. He throws a stick to the dog, go fetch the dog, and then the dog steps on the hill and starts barking. He's like, what's going on? And then they all look over and they see it. They quick run back, and then he actually starts fighting. He's actually like, compared to everything else, he's like, it's where he gets his first hero moment. You see him like fighting with just like he had a hoe in his hand, like a makeshift hoe, and he's just basically just knocking people down. And he finally picks up the sword, only to get like hit in the back of the head. He's knocked out. So his dog runs back in there, and the dog gets shot with an arrow in the side. Even still, the dog's like, I gotta keep doing this. I keep dragging him. And it's just the dog is so loyal to the end. The dog, gets him in the forest. He's laying there unconscious. The dog's just killed over, and the dog's dead. And even then, you come back, after the scene, he's carrying the dog that's in his arms, and he walks back to his village. People are on spikes, dude. They're impaled through their chests, their stomachs. I'm like, this is harsh. And obviously this was not meant to be a kid's movie. I can tell you right there.
And here's the thing: even before this scene, you've got the scene where, the lady who's pregnant with him, they're laying in her bed.
Oh yeah.
And the witch sneaks into the room and puts the spell on her and transfers the womb like into the cow or whatever, runs off with the cow.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's just kind of
gross,
weird and odd. And I liked it. So again, we start off with, wanting to sacrifice a baby, stealing the baby like that and everything else. So I'm like, I'm digging this. I'm liking this. And then it gets kind of, hokey to the scene you talk about where, he meets Tanya Roberts' character. But no, you've got great scenes here where he's walking out of the burning village and you've got these bodies just burnt to a crisp on pikes, and all that too. I'm like, this looks really friggin' great. Like I say, the cinematography is fantastic. A lot of the set pieces are good. Some of them not so much, and that's unfortunate. I think one of the negatives of it. But for the most part, this movie is very watchable.
It's just props. This is all just handmade stuff. I mean, first, I don't know how much was done in the soundstage or anything like that, but there's no CG. And it shows that there's no CG, and I'm happy because CG would just kind of makes it unrealistic for me. Yeah. I like it when this seems more realistic because they had to go. I mean, obviously when they showed the scenes from like the canyons and all that stuff, I don't know if they're shooting in Arizona or where they're shooting, or Australia, but just you get to see the bluffs and all that stuff, and it felt more real. And then what's really cool is because this is a cool concept because they really capitalize on this. He has because he's born of magic, with all stuff. He has the mark on his hand, everything. He's able to
beast.
He's able to basically telepathically communicate with animals. So he's able to basically see through the eye of a not an eagle, but like a hawk going around, or falcon. I can't remember what it was, a hawk or a falcon, and he can see as it's flying around. It does a little tunnel vision. He can actually look at eye shape on the screen, and you see it as the hawk's flying. It's basically like this is the first IMAX. That's what it felt like.
Well, and filming those shots there too wasn't always easy. I mean, you had a steady cam to allow some steady, full longer shots, tracking shots and whatnot too. But stuff like that wasn't always the easiest. And it's simple, but it's effective.
But
and that's the whole key thing to it.
But that one shot though, where he meets up with John Amos' character, and he gets a vision where they're holding Kira hostage, is flying over the lake or the ocean on the between the canyon. Yeah. That is like, dude, it looks like a drone shot, doesn't it?
It does. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's like, yeah.
Well, what's neat, like I say, is the film is really great when I think there's no dialogue. So he knows he's going to go seek revenge. He's got the mark or whatever. So Conan comparisons aside, he's traveling. He gets the ferrets, and because it's one of the few quicksand scenes you see on film, but I like it.
Yeah.
So those ferrets are his buddies now. He's got the tiger. He's got the hawk with him, and he's walking around. And he gets to this town, which is the town where the lady said, "No, I'm a slave. I got to get sacrificed," or like that. And of course, everybody's not there in town, so it's kind of eerie. And of course, everybody's in the center because you come up to Mayax, and the first thing you see is him just tossing a kid in this burning flame pit. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. He's not messing around. And it's not like he's not holding a kid. You literally see the camera shot looking at him, and he's holding a young child in real, an actor, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really, really neat. And then he goes to grab another one, and I'm like, they're doubling down on this. I enjoy it. I appreciate it because he's starting to realize what's going on. And what Marc Singer, I think, gives across in the way he plays this film is that he doesn't seem like he's a jerk. He seems kind of like boyish. He seems kind of naive. Yeah. And here we get the evil adult world just banging on right in front of your face what's going on, because there's really not much worse things you can do. He's lost his dog. His village has been wiped out. He's getting the he's getting the feelies for this girl that he's trying to wear down. He doesn't know what the hell the world's all about. And then he sees kids getting sacrificed. It's like, okay. Okay.
Yeah, like I said, having John Amos in here play the character Seth, who was originally the right hand or guard of his father, the king. Having him, those two meet, and then I just like it was cool. I mean, John Amos is a fun actor. So seeing him in this I think really helped out to reinforce it, because dude's like it's like Stonewall Jackson. He just basically starts knocking people down. He's got this. He's like the little John, but he's smarter though. He's not playful, kind of dumb. No, he's the dude. It's like he's the gladiator. He's the guy. He's like he's protective of the young prince that's with him too.
Mm-hmm.
We later find out at the end that's actually like his younger brother, because that the king is actually his dad at the end that they're trying to restore. And even so, he's like, no. He's gonna let the kid take over, rule. He's like, he doesn't want to be king and all. He wants to go help other people. And there's two other movies from this, and we'll have to go over the second one because the second one is cheesy as heck. But this movie was so well liked. That it had a budget of, I think it was $9 million, and came out with $14 million. So it wasn't really too much like an increase, but yeah, it spawned off in 1999. They created a TV series based off this movie. So it went for 3 seasons.
Never watched it.
It was on the WB, which is now the CW, or was it? I can't remember if it was the CW at the time. All I know is it was 1999. They had it on there, and it went for 3 seasons. They kind of kept it the same kind of concept, but it was like 4 people traveling. This is back, of course, when right after they did Hercules and Xena. I know on the WB, they're really trying to capitalize on that whole barbarian stuff. This was the final show. It didn't last too long. 3 seasons. It was pretty good for any show, whether you like it or not. So yeah, this was actually a pretty good concept movie. I'm not sure if this spawned any comic books or anything from that, but
I would not know.
Because I didn't see anything on the Wikipedia like that, But it would be fun though. I wouldn't have actually would have read comic books if they would have had that. Because I know they did a TV series, but because Conan has his own comic books, but this would have been a fun concept to have as, hey, crossing over with like Dynamite. Dude, get on this. Why don't you have this with Red Sonja or Conan or any of that stuff? Like having crossover. This is a guy who literally can talk to animals.
Yeah, and there's, like I said, there's enough scenes in here where you go, the concepts are interesting in the way they do it, and you can tell that, again, the Phantasm guy, Don Coscarelli, who did this, really enjoys the material. And so after... he's searching for the bad guy again a little bit after this mid part of the movie. There's a scene where he walks up to this giant tree, and it's at night, and looks like things are hanging on there. Looks like cocoons or whatever like that. Oh, yeah. And he gets up there, and all of a sudden he's surrounded by these people. And it's kind of almost silly looking because, again, it's not a huge budget film. But the idea is that they're like human bats on feet, and then they wrap around you, and you just emulsified almost immediately. And it's like,
dude, this scared me.
Kind of badass, huh?
I watched this movie probably when I was like 10 or 12. So when I saw that, I see the guy is he's kicking, and you see his feet, and then you see all this green ooze coming out, like Nickelodeon slime coming out, and then when the guy opens up his wings over, you all see his bones just drop out, skeleton bones.
Seeing a lot of us at that time when we were around that age, 10, 12 years old, watching this film talked about, because that was creepy. And of course, you had Conan, which like, okay, that's the adult film. Then you had this one, which is kind of in the middle of this, because another one around the same time too was Clash of the Titans. So it was a wonderful early start to the 80s here, having these sword and sorcery type things. And they kind of, there was more of them. There was Dragon Slayer. There was Adventures of Forbidden Zone, I think. And then there's the Krull is the one I'm thinking of, which has a somewhat youngerish Liam Neeson in it, and a few others. But this one really stood out because it's fun. It's enjoyable. It's a little bit different. While it's kind of generic as far as the way people talk and everything else, it's not a deep film with a lot of lore and background that you can sink your teeth into. It doesn't have to be. It's a certain unique view on it, and it's done for the most part pretty well.
I was thinking about who would you replace with Rip Torn if Rip Torn decided to have this movie. Who would cast? The only person I can think would be Michael Ironside back then. Michael Ironside could play some creepy, intimidating characters strong. So
there were several B guys like Ironsides, and another guy whose name escapes me. But he was a heavy in the early 80s films. He's got a pockmarked face on it, and he wore heavy rimmed glasses, blondish. I just saw a movie with him not too long ago. He would have been great. So there's definitely a lot of them too, but you needed somebody that just looked mean and nasty and not childish.
Yes.
And of course, Singer in here, I don't know his height, 5'10" maybe, but he's
6'2".
6'2", that's all. That explains the way it looks, because he's long and lean. He's not unmuscular, but he's obviously totally, ketogenic or whatever like that. He probably didn't eat any carbs at all during filming. He had that California look to him. So no little 5'7" pansy guy here or whatever. Now, again, Marc didn't look like Conan. He didn't look like these gigantic studs. But for what he was doing, kind of like this Ranger persona, he was fine. I had zero issues with him too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much of it's a spray tan or fake tan or the shots and all that stuff that they can do to make it good.
Who knows? It looks more like baby oil.
It looked real enough to me. And he was sufficiently baby oiled enough for the people that care about that sort of thing that you would see it.
Just like Conan, all those movies, whenever there's a barbarian, he always has to shave his chest, and he has to, unlike Sean Connery, who refused to in that movie he did where he was the barbarian. Zardoz, I think it was called.
Zardoz, yep.
Yeah. He had the chest hair. He's the only one I've known that had chest hair still. That was the main character. Because even Tarzan, I'm sure they had the actor shave and all that. So I don't know if it was frowned upon, maybe back in the day, as far as you get a higher rating if a guy had his shirt off with he had tear in his chest, maybe. No, because it's...
Well, you have to think of the times. The 80s coming out of the 70s, things were really changing from the 70s, long labels and those kinds of clothes there too, to more of a form-fitting, almost European sort of style, skinny knit ties, form-fitting jackets, very European, as they would say in the fashion industry. But men's hair was definitely a thing. It was long, a lot of mullets, a lot of facial hair, a lot of chest hair, proudly showing it. Nobody had issues with that as well. I'm sure there's plenty of women that have various types of haircuts downstairs, you know what I'm saying? But it wasn't as designer-ish and clean-looking as it is today.
Because you look at it, even in still entertainment today, you see guys like John Cena or some of the wrestlers, some of them they clean shave. It's like, Dave Bautista does the same thing. It's like, I don't know, and apparently they think it looks better, or maybe they just can't grow it.
It's a question of looking masculine. So someone like Arnold, who wasn't very chesty or hairy, but he's a bodybuilder, you're going to shave. You're going to get a fake tan. You're going to do all those things. But you get somebody like Marc Singer, who's not the biggest guy in the world, but he was long, he was lanky, just making the best with what you can do with it. And the thing too about his earnestness in this film, the way he looks physically, is if he came out looking like he was weathered and beat up and had crow's feet and had a pot belly and looked like whatever, it wouldn't work for the role. He looked like a young man coming, 15, 20 years old out of town, making his mark there on the world, and his body reflected that. So it's consistent with the story.
I guess it makes sense. Yeah, they want him to look like he's in his early 20s. Unlike you look Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford had the chest hair rocking whenever he did stuff, so he was much older. He's a professor, so he was probably in his late 30s, early 40s. As far as for those roles. But getting off the topic of chest hair, I want to point out what comment on Moreno saying that Chris Claremont, in case you don't know who that is, a big X-Men writer back in the day in the 80s, he basically made a character called Beastmaster who was able to control animals. So maybe he was a big fan of this movie, or maybe he just say, you know what, I'm going to take this idea, put it in my own.
I'm going to rip it off. I'm going to be inspired by the book, the original source material.
I was inspired. Because I always remember back in the day, like there was Conan, and then you had then you had Beastmaster. I'm like, and I could always forget what it was. I just know it was a guy who could hit 2 ferrets and a hawk or an eagle, and then I forgot about the freaking where was it, a panther, or was it supposed to be a tiger?
Whichever one it was supposed to be, they actually painted the other animal. I think tigers were easier to use, so what they did was they actually spray painted it, or whatever you want to call it. They colored him. I'm not joking at all.
No. I'm laughing because it probably is true.
No, it is. It is. I watched several interviews with Singer about it.
And that's another thing about this movie. The animals in this, the training. Obviously, it's easy to train a falcon or a hawk, and that's why he had that thing on his arm and stuff. They pay attention to that because if he didn't have that, you're landing my they just rip your arm off. So they actually pay attention to stuff like that, the detail. But having the animals in there, like the ferrets are were okay, but that tiger or panther, whatever you want to call it, black tiger. He is actually pretty cool to have, and there's that scene in there where they're actually walking in into the dungeon, and the tiger's in front of them, and I'm like, that would have been CG today, because no actor's gonna get next to a tiger like that.
And that is a strong argument for why, even though this film's dated and it's almost 40 years old, that it really works in a lot of ways, because we've talked before about CGI. You're absolutely right, because there's some of the interviews I talked about with Marc Singer. He mentioned he'd be like, "Wow, what was like working with animals?" Because the two things you're not supposed to work with in Hollywood are children and animals, right?
Yeah,
but if done right, it's great. And nobody seems to like dogs or whatever. And outside of Ace Ventura, you don't really have a lot of animals in films. You had a few religious theme type movies in the past few years having to deal with dogs and reincarnation and all that stuff, but that doesn't count to me like this movie. But you're absolutely right. So when you go back and you watch this film and he's walking and the panther or tiger or whatever's in front of him, you're like, well, shit, I guess they just said, hey, this is the best copy we got, the best print, let's roll with it. And so it's all authentic, the reactions they have. And there's even like one scene too where like they're walking through the town and he looks a little funny for a second, and I'm thinking, okay, I think the panther tiger bumped them a little bit, because that thing's hundreds of pounds. So it's like you don't know what you're getting when you're filming. So there's the magic of it and trying to capture it.
There's that scene where the guy he's running away. The tiger's chasing after him on the horse, and the tiger falls into his pit. So so John Amos and goes up there, confronts the guy, and he pushes him back into the pit, and the basic tiger mauls him. So I'm thinking like, okay, this guy's gonna be ripped to shreds and all stuff, and then we see Dark come up, and he confronts and he talks to him, and then they help with a giant log, and they put it into so the tiger up, and you see this how the tiger is gracefully jumps on, climbs back up.
It's beautiful to see, isn't it?
Oh my god! And then
so graceful.
But while the tiger's coming up, I had to pause. I'm like, because I showed the guy, he's just like this. There's no blood or nothing. I don't know, no rip to shreds or nothing. Like, really, guys? Because only half a second, you didn't do anything. I'm like, he should have had like at least ripped a shirt, blood. He'd have to be mauled or but this had blood all over him. That's all you had to show. You didn't have to show like chunks missing out of him. But yeah, they probably figured no one's gonna notice. You're too busy looking at the tiger.
Well, I wanted to kind of close up here before we get to our final thoughts on a special note about. I believe it's pronounced Andre Norton. The lady who is involved in this in a way. She was a huge, big-time science fiction writer. So actually, back in the early 80s, we had a bookstore here in Pine Hills that was where E and I would walk to get books. But it had all used books. It was the only place in town except for one other place near downtown Orlando that had the racks out there with the comics portrayed the way they're supposed to be, not on spinners or anything like that, but sealed in a bag with a price. You weren't allowed to take them out or touch them or anything like that. And I didn't know any of that stuff. And so when E and I would walk up there, we'd check some of that stuff out. He'd hang out there. I would check out the RPG stuff and rows of fiction stuff. It's the best bookstore I've ever been in. Sadly, it's of course no longer there. But there was the other place was where, at the time, because we couldn't drive, where E's older brother Jack would drive us to. It was a few miles away from downtown Orlando, near what used to be the Navy base, and it's on Corrine Drive. And there's this huge bookstore, and that was the bookstore for all the geeks to go to. Have a couple tables. Some people would start playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's not like how it is today, where everybody does that in all the stores. This was the only one that did it. And I remember being in that store one time, and we were getting ready to go somewhere. His brother's getting ready to drive us. We're waiting outside, and came out, and it's like, hey, you know who that was? And it's like, who? That guy? The person behind the desk? No, the woman. She lived in Winter Park, Andre Norton. And I was like, oh, because I'd already knew about her. I think I'd read one or two of her books or whatever like that. So I didn't know her by sight, but she lived in the Old Money place here, which technically is its own town called Winter Park, Florida here. And she wrote a lot when she was there. She ended up moving somewhere else and dying. She lived to be like 80, 90 years old. But it was weird because to me at the time I thought, oh, sleepy Central Florida didn't really have anything going for it. This is pre-Orlando Magic, pre-everything else there too. But we had a very prolific and successful, if you want to call it that, female science fiction writer too. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that somebody involved in this film happened to be involved here in Central Florida, you know, trying to piece together those things, and that literally kind of ran into her. You just don't know who you're going to meet when you're out and about, you know?
It was funny. I was just reading up, like, and I was quickly looking back, and because I'm going over these other details. Apparently, Cisco said it was like he gave 2 stars out, and he didn't care for it as much. You know, it just felt like it was just long and more boring and all and stuff. But then you read other people's stuff. They said like it did well in its own merits. You know, it felt like a comic book adapted movie. You know, back in the day. Well, that they didn't really know what comic book movies were. You know, what you got was Superman. You know, but yeah. So this movie actually ended up. They were trying to get it really promoted. The filmmakers actually talked to Tanya Roberts. Say, hey, why don't you go pose in Playboy? That'll get attention. So she does it. And guess what, though? The issue doesn't come out until after the movie is released. Mm-hmm. So I was like, so those who got, hey, if anybody in the listening around has that Playboy, it's worth money.
Well, she would, of course, go on to be a Bond girl in 1985.
With Roger Moore. It was
his last film.
His last one. Was it Never Say Never?
Or no.
Wait, sorry, that's not right. Which one? Which one was it, though? I'm trying to remember. It was the one that had the Duran Duran one, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
View to a Kill.
A View to Kill, that's what it was, yeah.
To a Kill. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Tanya Roberts was around a lot, and unfortunately, she'd passed away a few months ago. And I think when people go back and they look at old films, one of the things that really triggers me, and not much does these days, but I've mentioned before about how Stranger Things was one of the few things that kind of sort of almost got it right in the first season, because after that, not really. And while I appreciate the 80s nostalgia, a lot of it I'm going, they're not doing it right, or they weren't around. And Ready Player One, just don't even get me started on that. There definitely seems to be a rewriting or re-imaging of what people thought the 80s were, and it's upsetting because these people are younger than me and they really have no idea, and they just try to put it together because the 80s is one of the few decades where you're able to kind of go back and almost recreate it in the will. It's a lot harder to with stuff back in the days, and you can't just watch a bunch of John Hughes films and go, oh, okay, I know what makes an 80s film. It's not even there. There's a lot of darkness to it. I mean, a lot of fun, which people don't get. I think this movie has both, but to me, you got to watch this film. If you like the 80s, you got to check this out. Unfortunately, I think Tanya Roberts had been a little tight cast, and you know, basically called like 80s trash or B-level actress. All she did was show her assets, and that's it. You know what? There are plenty of women that did that. There was a lot of soft, sexy stuff late at night in the B films. We used to call it Skinamax, not Cinemax, and nobody cared. Everybody understood what was going on with it. And frankly, if she's willing to do it, that's fine. Because I tell you what, I'd rather watch Tanya Roberts getting out of the water like that in a skimpy outfit like that, where it's a part of the story, and you know, my 12-year-old me can go, "Ooh, look, boobies." But the bottom line is just, you got a bunch of beefcake running around there too. So more power to you. But today's film, you're absolutely right. They would not do any of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
shame, really.
Tanya Roberts, and I mean, I said there was other actors too, like London Clarkson. That's the one I was trying to think of before. Mm-hmm. She did, she was in the Barbarian stuff and all. These are, I said, like this. Going back and looking at all these movies, you can tell these are written by guys who basically read the movie or read the heavy metal magazine, or just were into the fantasy and all. Yeah, like, you know, the Conan stuff, the John Carter, Tarzan. This was like their outlets. So that's, and I can see that's why this movie did well. You know, now the sequels, we'll have to get into that because I got a few words to say about the sequels. Even though Marc Singer reprised his role in both those movies. Yeah, but that's next time.
Yeah, it is. All right, any other final thoughts you got?
No, just if for those who are watching after the show is done, leave your comments, and if you like it, like it. If you hate this video, hit a dislike. That's all I can say, man. And if you're leaving a dislike, let us know why.
Nobody dislikes the Beastmaster.
If you don't like Rob's floating orb, let us know.
It's the all-seeing eye. It's like Phantasm, it's just with an X. Yeah, good film. I almost didn't really want to rewatch it, and then when I did, I was pleasantly surprised because actually it came across as being better than what it was. Because I definitely remembered the cheesy, goofy stuff.
Yep.
And I'd forgotten about more of the adult stuff and everything else there too, watching it.
As I said, my dad would censor this stuff. So me and my sister, 3 years old, whenever we go watch a movie from the 80s, they're like, huh, I don't remember this being this very adult. It's like I'm watching it for the first time. Like I'm getting like the director's cut. It's awesome.
And really, it's one of those lines of unspoken or dialogue that just, to me, is like great and unintentionally. It's, who are you? I'm Dar. Every time I hear that, or if somebody says something like that if somebody says that in a movie today, well, who are you? Who do you think you are? I just want to go, I'm Dar. And nobody would get it. It's that non sequitur kind of stuff you get on like Psych or something.
Be still, the tiger is fierce.
I have my strength. I have my cunning. I have my wisdom.
Rania, we wanted to redo the Heavy Metals movies. Those are fun. At least
I've been wanting to do that, but backstage a year or so ago when we were going to do it, there was a lot of pissing and moaning about it because people didn't seem to like it. Because Heavy Metal is a fantastic movie. Absolutely. Cosmic Concerts, checking that out at the Midnight Movie. Yeah, you're kidding me, bro?
Heavy Metal is, like I said, it has multiple different stories in it. And I actually prefer the sequel, 2000, more than I do the first one. But the first one has its one I guess short film adaptation in there. That's the one with the taxi driver. Which, for those who watched Fifth Element, I feel like that guy who directed that took a lot of this influence from that movie on Heavy Metal.
You think? Yeah.
It was almost word for word.
It's something, hopefully we'll go back on here and people will say, whether I hate it or not, we're going to watch it. All right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Dar, Beastmaster, Marc Singer, 1982, here on Kicking It. I'm here with RDV, and we're going to say goodnight. Say goodnight, RDV.
Stay extreme!
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining. It's a fun movie. Go check it out. Good night.
And stay extreme. Do it now. Extreme!
Stay Dar.